most of my interactions or most of my work at Access Sport is club focused. Historically, a significant part of that has been cycling clubs. So nice to see some British cycling and some familiar faces from the cycling network on the call. And a lot of my work has been supporting clubs in a reasonably light touch way. And that's what sort of encouraged us to start developing and using the club inclusion tool. So we move on to the next slide, please, Shana. So yeah, let's start with what is the club inclusion tool. I appreciate some of you are familiar with it. You've plugged data into it, perhaps once or on more occasions, and for others, it's the first time you're seeing anything about it at all. But a quick summary. It's at the most simple level, it's a data tool that helps clubs like yours report and understand progress towards being more inclusive. And for Access Sport, it's a tool that allows us to sort of see progress across the network in terms of progress towards greater inclusion. It's designed to be really light touch and does not require clubs to submit personal data about participants. So that's just one thing that often crops up in questions. The tool comprises of two main steps, as the slide in front of you says. There's the form, the data entry survey, and then the step 2 is the visual report that turns that data into something more interesting to look at and overlays the club data with some other benchmarks and census data too. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, why did we develop it? I guess I've covered it to a degree already, but we support nearly 500 clubs in total. Some of those clubs receive very intensive support where it's realistic to expect detailed participant registration data to come in, which we use Upshot to collate. But where clubs move beyond that phase in their support and receive lighter touch support, or we work with them through one of our networks, it's not realistic to expect that volume of data to come in. So this tool is designed to sort of provide a much lighter touch way of sort of keeping our fingers on the pulse with progress towards inclusion. It's designed to be free and to help us understand at a sort of network-wide level where things stand, but equally for clubs to be able to, for you to be able to view where you're at and to benchmark that against other clubs, against area data, and to view change over time, which starts to become much more interesting as there's a few data points entered. Yeah, if you could, next slide. So yeah, the step 1, as I said, is a simple survey. We're not going to show a screen grab of that now. No one needs to see that, but it's a Microsoft form, and the sort of information that's asked for in there is some basic club information, name and postcode, which then matches up to our database in the background, participant numbers, so an overall total number of participants that attend on a typical week or at your club. And that's, if we might be supporting a club with one session, but what we're asking for here is the total number of participants across the whole club. That provides really useful contextual data there. Then we ask for number of participants, female participants, number of male participants, number of participants from ethnically diverse communities, and finally, number of participants who are disabled or have a long-term health condition. These, if the data is available at your club to submit specific numbers, great, plug those in, but the tool is designed to allow for best estimates on that. Recognize that's not perfect, but to allow this tool to sort of function, that it feels like a kind of reasonable way of working, and that depends on the size of the club, what's kind of feasible to do. Step 2 is the visual report, which in a moment we will get that up on the screen, and I'll do a quick demo to sort of talk you through that. But the visual report, as I said earlier, kind of shows the data that's plugged in through the surveys in a visual format and overlays with data from other clubs using the tool, as well as census data undertaken by the Office of National Statistics every 10 years. So in a moment, we'll get the, I'm going to replace Shana's screen share with the visualization tool. Bear with me. So hopefully you can see a predominantly sort of black screen in front of you and the header inclusion tool visualization. I can only see Shana's face at the moment, so you just nod, yeah, thumbs up or nod, perfect. So yeah, this first slide is an introductory slide. There's 6 slides that I'm going to talk you through briefly now. As you can see here, this contains some headline information, mostly useful for us. You know, total number of clubs altogether, total number of responses, and then the total number of participants. There's also a little box on here that allows us to filter and view a specific club, useful to you. So you can zoom in on the club that is closest to you, or yeah. And then we can move on to the next slide, which again is another sort of contextual slide, really useful for us to be able to see all the clubs that are plugged into the back end of the tool. And then there's 2 color codes here: red, slightly counterintuitively for the clubs that have provided data, and then blue indicates the clubs that are on the system but haven't yet provided any data into the tool. And for our purposes, there's a couple of ways of filtering things here. This drop down here with some place names and some sport names allows us to filter the data by our changing places and changing sports programs. And then beneath that, there's the option to filter the data by individual clubs. And at the bottom, you'll see a bar which shows total number of clubs, 263 here. And it sort of plots on that bar chart how many of them are in different deciles in the indices of multiple deprivation. And again, that will change depending on how you filter the data in there. We'll move on to the next page. So this one is it's a sort of diversity comparison slide. What I'm going to do here is choose one particular club because it starts to then become more relevant. I'm going to scroll down this long list and we'll find Hillsborough Pump Track. Click on that. And then I'll just sort of talk you through this slide overall and draw some attention to certain elements of it. So the slide is designed to show in the sort of first the clubs column. That's the club data submitted into the tool. The second, or the middle column there, which has got area as a header, as it says, is area-wide data at sort of postcode level, and in this case for Hillsborough in Sheffield. And then the column on the right, as it suggests, all clubs, is all clubs that have submitted data into the club inclusion tool. So it allows us to benchmark Hillsborough Pump Track, which is the name of the club in Sheffield, benchmark their data against a couple of other relevant data sets. So if we take the top row, gender, first of all, we can see that the blue part of the first donut is at around 23, nearly 24% of riders there are female. And that compares to nearly 51% of the local population being female. For a BMX club, it's not bad. There's obviously work to be done there, but there are lots of BMX clubs where it is so heavily stacked that the gender gap is much bigger. But an interesting one that there's work to be done, and it sort of prompts some questions about what we can do to support that area of the club's development. And then if we go down to the middle row, ethnicity. So here it's interesting that the club are reporting around 19% of participants are from ethnically diverse communities. And crucially, in the local area, the census data tells us that it's nearly only 8% of the population are from ethnically diverse communities. So this sort of suggests that there's a real strength that the club have developed here. It makes me want to know what's behind that, and to ask them sort of questions and understand sort of what's been happening on the ground to kind of drive that, or are there some statistical anomalies that have prompted that? But I think it's really good to use this tool to spot sort of strengths and successes. And then finally, on the disability row at the bottom, so the stats for the club, around 9%. There's a gap, you will have noticed, a white box in the area data. That's because there is, at the time we pulled the tool together, there wasn't postcode area disability stats available. So it's something that we're looking to add when we refine the tool and make some changes in the future. But for sort of useful context, Scope research suggests that about 11% of children across the UK are disabled or have a long-term condition. So it shows that that 9% is heading towards a sort of national kind of benchmark there. And actually, we know with Hillsborough that there's a big disability cycling provider that operates in the same park. So it suggests that the two, this club and Cycling for All in Sheffield, together actually serve that the disabled community pretty well. And sometimes that's another thing you can do with this. There's sort of overlaying of the stories that come out from these slides and the visualization with what we kind of know on the ground too, that can give another sort of bit of nuance to the insight that we glean from it. We're then going to look at 3 slides which are all to do with change over time. So the first one we're looking at here is gender over time. The line that you can see sort of wiggling, zigzagging its way across the screen shows the percentage of female participants across what appears to be 6 data points there. We can sort of see from this that it's quite an erratic line, with one high point of 40% back in sort of beginning of, well, probably the end of 2022, and then a bit of a dip and a low point, and then a sort of erratic sort of progress since. It's really difficult to sort of tell what pattern is emerging there. It's sort of possibly a bit of a downward trend, but it'd be really interesting to see where the next data points are and whether there's the beginning of a trend, and it prompts some questions to sort of understand what's going on to sort of create this pattern. The next one, a similar chart, this time plotting ethnic diversity of the club over time. Here, a much more sort of clear trend, starting from 0 when data was first plugged in 2022, and then a real upward trajectory up to 65%, and then it settled back down again to around about 40%, which, as we saw from the previous slide, compares very, very favorably to the overall diversity of the population in Hillsborough. And I think that's a really key thing, that population looks different in the areas around every single club. So that benchmarking against what that community looks like and the demographic profile there is a really sort of key part of this. And again, it'd be fascinating to see where this graph goes next. And it's prompted so many questions about what's been happening on the ground in terms of delivery and outreach and promotion to support this change over time. And finally, on this, we have the disability over time, which again plots a very similar graph, starting low, could not be lower, 0%, which is either that there was not confidence in reporting on disability, or it wasn't part of the sort of conversations that were being had with participants, or it reflected that the club wasn't very inclusive to disabled young people at that point in time. And now there's been a real surge in progress, well above the national benchmark, well above the sort of local area benchmark as well. And again, it suggests that there's been a real focus in this space. It suggests that there's been some good work done there to drive this, and it prompts some really good questions and conversations with the club that recognises that progress and sort of celebrates it, and perhaps even opportunities for us to develop case studies that showcase what was done there, so that other clubs can learn from that too. That's pretty much the end of the sort of demo sort of stage of this. Hopefully that gives us plenty of time to have a bit of a Q&A about the tool. Shana, perhaps if we stop sharing screens, we can see some sort of each other's sort of faces and tiles on the screen. And I haven't been able to keep track of the chats while I've been talking, not able to multitask. But if anyone wants to pipe up with any questions, please do. Or otherwise, let's dip into the chat.
Yeah, so we've had some good questions in the chat, and so we can start with one of those to maybe get us going. One thing to note, like obviously this is all around the club inclusion tool. So if you've got any questions about other areas of Access Sport work or club development stuff, please pop it in the chat and we'll get to it either after today's session or in an email, just so we can try and stay on club inclusion tool topics. But a good one to start us, I think, from Nikki is, how often does the Power BI dashboard get updated, Andy?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, we try and update it every week. But if you've plugged in data and you want to see the refreshed version of the visualization sooner than that, then get in touch with me or your main point of contact at Access Sport. It doesn't take long to do the refresh, but there's a couple of manual steps there that mean it doesn't automatically happen. There's a couple of things we just need to sort of validate in the background and then press republish to web. So yeah, weekly as a general rule, and can do on demand if needed as well.
Brilliant. Open it to the floor if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question. If not, we have got quite a few in the chat, so happy to keep going through those. Cool, I'll go for the next one. So we've got Claire, who said, I'd like to know how you encourage clubs and members to provide this data. Obviously, I'm sure we've all experienced asking for feedback, and being able to gather monitoring can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. So how do the delivery team encourage clubs to provide this data?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it's something that is still a work in progress. There's not the perfect way of going about it, but I think one of the common scenarios we have is that we have clubs that are supported in a very intensive way, and at that stage there's an expectation that registration data and session registers are submitted to us that are then plugged into Upshot, which is relatively time consuming in addition to all the sort of other responsibilities of running the club. And as sort of move out of that intensive phase towards something more light touch, this tool represents a much simpler, easier way to submit data to us. 5 minutes or 10 minutes once per quarter. So I think there's a sort of motivation there that there's a way of just keeping a finger on the pulse with things, that 5 or 10 minutes of your time will then not only submit useful data for us, but the fact that there's a feedback loop, that it pulls through to the visualization that creates something that we think is valuable and interesting to clubs. I think that's the other part of it, that the stories that you can glean from looking at the different slides on the visualization might prompt some interesting sort of questions or ideas as a club committee. It may help you make a case for future funding applications, or even to reach out to Access Sport again for support in areas which aren't necessarily strengths at the moment. And I also think there's something about the data there that it's very headline level, and perhaps kind of you start looking at that and then you want to zoom in a little bit further and understand more. So I think that feedback loop's crucial. I think there's lots of times where we ask for data and then we use it for reporting and all our purpose, but actually there's not that kind of circle completed where clubs get to see something in return for that.
Cheers, Andy. Nikki's got her hand up. So polite, Nikki. Thank you. Oh. Jump in.
I'm trying to be polite. Can you recommend a tool for us being able to keep track of registrations. We use Spond for people booking in every week, but that doesn't make it much easier for us to record sort of their ethnic diversity and everything, because we don't really have a record of that. Can you recommend something where parents could like complete a form and it will keep track of our members?
Good.
Sorry.
Good. No, that's all right. I mean, it's a good question. Funnily enough, we often recommend Spond as a good sort of club admin tool. My understanding within Spond is there's ways to sort of customize it to be able to capture different data at point of registration.
Yeah.
But it maybe is one that as a team we sort of go away and sort of come back with a couple
Someone
of
else has said,
Sophie sort of chimed in the chat by the looks of it about, yes, you can customize fields within Spond. So it might be that that's something to look at, which may work for new signups to the club.
Yeah.
Nikki, but maybe doesn't solve the problem for sort of, you know, the existing sort of participants that you've got on the record at the moment without going back and asking something more. But I think rather than ditching what you're using at the moment,
yeah,
I think Spond has so many strengths that it's worth exploring whether that can be adapted.
It would be just a lot easier to have that information all in one place rather than sort of Excel spreadsheet here and Spond spreadsheet there, and just trying to blend them to make life easier because I'm sure every volunteer is in the same position of their own family, their own job, and yeah,
definitely. We've got a contact at Spond, so if it's helpful, we can share Victoria at Spond's contact details. I'm sure she would be happy to field a question from you, or we can get some advice on this and sort of share in the round.
How to use Spond webinar.
Yeah, I think they've got some great online tools that exist already. So we'll try and find what's there, and if that doesn't address it, then we can follow up with.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly, Andy, just chime in on the back of Nikki's comment? I've just had a look on our Spond as well. So if you were to customize fields and ask the questions that you want, if you go into the member section, you can import the members onto an Excel. So how that looks in terms of regularly checking new participants and their data, but there is a way to do that just to make it easier to kind of download.
Thank you. I'll go and play with Spond at some point.
Thanks, Nikki.
So we've got a question here from Tim, which is, why is the data collected on a week-by-week basis rather than across the whole year or season?
Good question. We collect data on a quarterly basis, so 4 times per year, and this is always up for discussion whether that's the right intervals. There's a couple of reasons why we chose that. One is that's the sort of frequency that we do internal kind of sort of reporting to trustees, etc., and so it fits with a sort of rhythm of how we work. And the other was we took some feedback from clubs who are involved in piloting the tool in the first place, who sort of suggested that anything more frequent than that might be viewed as a kind of onerous task that would just be a bit too much to commit to. It does mean that with 4 data points each year, it can be slow for trends to emerge, and we can see some of those sort of erratic zigzagging lines sort of crop up, like we saw with I think the gender one for Hillsborough. But if there's it's under, as I say, under sort of constant review. If there's a sort of appetite for things to move more quickly, then we can look at kind of more frequent data points. But I think at the moment it feels like the right sort of balance, unless we get some insight to steer us otherwise. Hopefully that answers the question. Well,
and then we've got another one from Tim as well, who says, can we add historical data to the tool? For example, we've got registration data from the past few years. Would that be beneficial to being able to measure change?
Yes, is the short answer. perhaps if you're thinking of doing a kind of historical upload, let us know first. The reason I say that is we've already kind of reported on previous quarters. So when data comes in that sort of gets allocated to those prior reporting periods, it can cause a bit of confusion for our systems and for our monitoring and evaluation leads. So if you just give us a heads up, then we can keep an eye out for those that historical data coming in and making sure that that doesn't get added to the most recent sort of quarters numbers, but does kind of get counted towards that historical data, and then crucially the change over time can then be plotted. So I think it's great from that point of view, because the data just gets much more interesting once there's several data points from any particular club. Like one dot on the graph is kind of interesting-ish. Start to put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data points there, then the trends start to emerge. So yeah, if you've got that data and you're up for submitting it, let us know. And yes is the back to my short answer at the beginning with a long answer in the middle.
Well, Jason, go for it.
A good webinar, really interesting, thank you. So how can clubs use the data and the visual report? I mean, you've obviously done an awful lot of work with clubs, Andy, so I'm sort of putting you a little bit on the spot there, but have you got any examples of where clubs have been able to actually use it to benefit their work? And I'm thinking as well of things like funding and partnerships and so on and so forth. So yeah, really keen to hear about that.
Yeah, I guess there's a few things. I mean, I use it quite a bit in the relationships that I have with clubs. One, to sort of celebrate successes where things have gone well and there's been progress made. It can sort of go under the radar sometimes, so really useful to do that. It also enables clubs to come back to me and say, it's great that we've done some work with our disability inclusion work, but actually look at the stats, we're not so strong in this other area. What can you do to help, or are you able to hook us up with any other support that's out there? I think it's also in a similar way that clubs are using the data to prompt conversations with other funders. If they're making a small grant application, then the stats from this can help to sort of showcase where they are at the moment, and just sort of show that there's a kind of appetite to collect this data and measure progress in this sort of way, not just results on the track or results on the pitch. It's sort of keeping score of this side of things, I think looks really favourable for funders. So I think those are the kind of main ways. Yeah, and I think it sort of prompts some really good internal conversations for clubs too, especially bigger clubs where different members of the committee or different coaches don't necessarily get an oversight of everything that the club's doing. You can be quite zoomed in on your own responsibilities, but actually it shows that progress in one area, whether it's a Flyers hockey session or something like that, can have a sort of shift in the overall sort of profile of the club as a whole. And I think there's some pride to be taken in that too, that can be recognised in different ways.
Well, thanks, Jason. If anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question, that's great. We do have some other questions coming in separately that I can jump in with Andy. So we've got one here. Our club has grown in size since we first plugged data into the tool. The number of disabled, ethnically diverse and female riders has increased, but this doesn't show on the change over time graphics. This only shows percentages for each demographic group. How is there a way of being able, is there a reason for that, and how can they kind of remedy that?
Yeah, a really interesting one, because there's a few clubs in there that I think this probably applies to, and Redbridge being one of them, where we know from the work that we're doing together there's been real progress, and we've often spoken about the progress on a number of fronts. But because the club has grown in size overall, which is a good thing, there's more young people benefiting in total. That's a real positive. But because we measure percentages, it doesn't show as increased percentages, so the story doesn't come across clearly from the change over time graphs. So it's prompted some interesting questions for us. We need to make some changes to the tool at some point. It's not perfect. It has some limitations. So we're going to play around, or the intention when we next do some sort of development on it is to play around with whether we can include total numbers at a club as well as the percentage side of things, or consider a switch. So it's total numbers rather than percentages. But there's a few things to just weigh up with that. I think if you're viewing the tool and it's not sort of the story that you were expecting to see isn't coming across loud and clear, then get in touch with me or get in touch with your point of contact at Access Sport, because it's often really interesting to sort of explore that. Sometimes when you've got the Excel sheet with the raw data there and the numbers alongside the visualization, you can start to sort of understand what's going on. But yeah, there's a few examples that have cropped up where that sort of scenario has cropped up. Sort of highlights, I guess, that not every story can come through on the way the data is presented at the moment.
Go on, Jason, again.
Interesting. Just to follow up on that, really, Andy. Then, so as I mentioned to you at the beginning, the reason I'm here today is because even though I'm aware of this tool and we talk about it, I felt like my knowledge could be stronger. So this has been really, really helpful for me as well. So I suppose, would it be fair to say then that, I mean, when it comes to monitoring and evaluation, it's very rare that a tool is the tool to provide all of the answers, and you've spoken at the top, haven't you, about how this is aligned with the census data. So I suppose thinking about how Access Sport view inclusion in the widest sense, what this is a really good tool for doing is for those clubs who are fully inclusive, as it were, it does give you that ability to kind of align and cross-check with the local population makeup, doesn't it? So I suppose it's about viewing this in terms of where it's most impactful, rather than seeing this as the kind of the answer for all of your sort of solutions. Would that be a fair assessment, do you think, or not?
Yeah, I think so. If I've understood the sort of question correctly, I think, there, as I said at the top, there's sort of hundreds of clubs that we support in a light touch way, and this just gives us this chance to sort of keep fingers on the pulse with some fairly broad demographic groups. And at the moment, that's useful, and often it prompts some stories, some questions about, it'd be fascinating to dig a bit deeper or know a bit more there. And I think it enables that and prompts those sorts of questions, which is good. At the same time, it's probably also worth noting that there are some limitations with it. It needs a refresh at some point, and the more it is used and the more we're getting feedback on how it's being used and the sorts of questions or sorts of challenges people have got with it, the better informed we are about what we do with it next. And it's, it costs money as resource needed to put those sort of developments into practice. So like keep that information sort of flowing to us, and it can evolve. But yeah, it's not a perfect tool by any stretch, but I think it's a really nice way of keeping track of things. And certainly every time I'm speaking to a club, if there's data plugged in, it's a really useful thing to refer to steer some sort of strands of that conversation as well.
Well, thanks, Jason. Got a nice comment from Nikki here, who I know uses the tool a lot within Redbridge. So it definitely makes it a lot easier to compare your own data against census level data when completing funding requests, etc. Saves a lot of number crunching and Googling, which I think is a really kind of good summary of everything we've spoken about.
Just on that, Sean, I think it's worth sort of acknowledging that, thanks, Nikki, for sharing that. I think it's nice to hear in that instance that it seems to be saving you some work elsewhere. I know, Nikki, you like an Excel spreadsheet, but if it's saving you some time somewhere, then that's brilliant to know, because I think there's always a risk with these things that they create a little bit of extra work on top of what's already kind of a lot to do to run community clubs. So it's nice to know that it's saving some number crunching elsewhere. So thanks for sharing that.
One thing that came up, I sent an email out to everyone that registered today and asked if there was any like pre-questions, and one that did come through was like, we talk about the development of the tool and how we hope to expand it. Is there kind of any plans to start monitoring and tracking volunteers and coaches at clubs, which is something we work quite closely with community clubs to expand their volunteer and coach pool and the diversity of their volunteer and coach pool? So is that something that the tool will hopefully be able to track at some point in the future?
Hopefully, yes. When we launched the tool originally and piloted it, there was a question, and there had been a question at the end of the survey for a long time, asking clubs whether you would be happy submitting a similar sort of headline data for the sort of coaches and volunteers at your club. That question's disappeared now because we got an overwhelmingly positive response to that. So one of the things that we will review later this spring is whether that's something we want to add into it, and where that sits amongst all the other things that we could include in the tool. I think it's a really fascinating one because undoubtedly the diversity of the people running a club has a significant bearing in terms of being welcoming to different demographics from a sort of participant and family point of view, and it would be really intriguing to see how the two data sets sort of overlap and what trends can be spotted there. So yeah, one that we're going to review and figure out what work is involved in implementing that, and then sort of trying to prioritize that alongside some of the other things that we'd like to do to build on the current version of the tool.
Well, thanks, Andy.
No worries.
Anyone else got any questions that they'd like to ask? Or Andy, if you've got anything you want to add in, we've got a little bit of time left if anyone has anything else they'd like to find out, or if you've used the tool and maybe have a little bit of feedback around how you found using it, or if there was anything you wanted us to know about how, like, your user experience of engaging with the tool. This is the ideal opportunity to discuss. If not, I can jump back. Go on, Andy.
But yeah, there's a question that's cropped up before, and it may have come internally from colleagues, but I think it's probably one that's been asked by clubs too, and it's around if you're a club that is sharing registration data with Access Sport at present, I think there's a question there of, should you also be using the club inclusion tool if you want to? And I think it's important to just be a little bit cautious there, because we want to make sure that the data that we're collecting, there's not a risk of double counting. So I think if you are providing data to Access Sport in other ways at the moment, but you have an appetite to start using this tool, have a chat with your relationship manager, your delivery manager at Access Sport, to sort of figure out when would be a good time to sort of transition over, because I think there's a real risk that if data's coming in one way and then the same people are in effect being counted by this, that there's some double counting that takes place, and obviously we don't want that.
Well, so if no one else has any questions, or if Andy, you don't have anything else to throw in, I will start sharing my slides again, if I can find the button. Laptop always it has a funny turn every time I try and open PowerPoint, which is not ideal for things like this. Brilliant. So yeah, thank you to everyone that's asked a question or engaged with us today, engaged with today's session. We know that the club inclusion tool is something that a lot of our clubs are familiar with. So something like this is just a great way to kind of touch base and make sure that we're all using it to the kind of its highest potential, but also a great opportunity to ask some questions and hear from those that have used it over the last couple of years. If you had a question and it didn't get answered today, please feel free to drop either myself or Andy an email. I'll send out a follow-up email and include us both in it. So if there's any follow-up conversations you want to have, that's the ideal time. Like I said, today's session was hosted by our Inclusive Club Network. If you're not already in the network, again, I'll send a link, get involved. There's loads of webinars, lunch and learns, networking opportunities planned for the next few months. So would love to see you all at one of those. And finally, some of you may be aware that last year we launched our Building Stronger Communities research. You may have even been part of it. Your club might have been involved in sending out the survey. So we'd like to continue that research this year by looking at how the long-lasting impact community sport has on their communities. So we're asking clubs to share the survey again with the parents, carers and young people at their club. Once someone's taken part in the survey, your club then gets entered into a prize draw to win one of our Amazon vouchers. Don't worry about scanning the QR code on the screen just now. I'll also you'll get many links from me in a follow-up email, but hopefully that's something that you can share with your clubs and get involved in the ongoing bit of research. That is us for today. We've finished with a little bit of extra time. So if you have any other questions or you want to stay on the call and ask a question about the club inclusion tool, please feel free to stay on. Me and Andy can stay till 2 o'clock and answer any questions you have. But if not, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to see some new and familiar faces on the call today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks.